Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining me for our first Friday Focus. Smart Curriculum Network, we're offering this on a Friday morning. Somebody asked me why would you do this on a Friday morning? Well, for the number of years that I've been working with school leaders since being in leadership myself, Friday was one of those days where you could take the opportunity to step back from the busyness of the week and just focus on some of the things that need to be looked at or changed. So the idea of sitting here and talking to you on a Friday morning is simply because Friday is a time just to pause and perhaps take the opportunity to think about what needs to be done in your school, what are the big challenges you're facing, and what's out there in terms of research and understanding that might improve your perspective. Now, Smart Curriculum has been doing that with leaders, coaching and training, and bringing analytics to schools for the last 14 years. The Smart Curriculum product, many of our users use and see on a weekly basis. But this is the opportunity to explore how some of those things bring together. Now, Friday Focus is not just going to be about me and me talking for an hour about a particular subject. What we'd like to do over the next little while, over the next months, and we plan to have a conversation once a month. And it possibly will increase, so maybe fortnightly, but at the moment we're planning once a month. So welcome to the 17th of May as a start point. But what we'd like to do is I would like to bring some of the colleagues that I've worked with around the country and to talk about particular subjects. Now, Smart Curriculum, our focus is on the center of curriculum design and how that is driving what's going on in school. There are many other specialists that will look at teaching and learning strategies and behavior and attendance and pedagogical issues. My focus has always been on how do we put the school together and how do we create an experience which is exceptional for children. And many of you will know that if you've worked with me, that's a passion that I'm told exudes, but there we go. It comes out of me because that's what I talk about. That's what I believe in. And that's what I've worked for the last 39 years in terms of working in schools. What I'd like to do today is to talk about one of those passions, which is this whole idea of why curriculum analytics. I've got some slides I'd like to show you. Some of them are quite detailed, and maybe you'll need it on a big screen to be able to see all the detail. But I'd like to talk to you a little bit around why, make the case for what is it about curriculum analytics as to why I believe that it is a key element of school improvement. Now, I'm saying that and not suggesting in any way that quality teaching is not a good school improvement methodology. In fact, it's absolutely imperative for school improvement that the quality of the teaching is brilliant and is the highest that it can be. So there's no debate there. But I am going to make the case for understanding the curriculum, understanding the school in some different ways than maybe is the popular narrative. So let's get excited. I don't have a great deal of time, so let's make the case. So if I was to talk to you about curriculum analytics, I would say you'd be doing it because there are decisions that are demanded of you on a daily basis, and structural decisions and staffing decisions and impact decisions that are better made with good information. So many decisions that I see leaders making are based on a whim, are based on a gut feel, are based on sitting in a head teacher roundtable or a forum of some form where the question starts with, well, what are you doing? And how's it working in your place? And I believe that having good information about what's going on in your own organization is absolutely key to make informed decisions about how things are moving forward. I would also say that learner outcomes are not the only thing that impacts the decisions that you make. Yes, of course, learner outcomes do. And they are the first indicator that something perhaps is not quite where you want it to be. But it's not the only thing. you're likely to be under pressure to make decisions quickly, and having good information to inform is really key. And then having heightened security around, well, we know this because we've analysed it. I'd also suggest that curriculum, that analysing your curriculum provision is actually probably more than you think that it might be. You know, people say to me, so what about Ofsted? What about ISI if you're in the independent sector? What about performance measures? Yeah, well, of course, they are indicators, but they also hide a number of other characteristics underneath them that are not often seen in performance measures. Now, I'm not going to get in here to a conversation about the Ofsted and its position. I genuinely believe that you don't improve things by continually making statements about it in the way that that's done at the moment. But that's a personal decision, and that's a personal belief. But what about other indicators of what's going on? Destination data. Are children doing what they need to do to move them to the future? Are they attending? Are they actually coming to the school? That whole idea of the social contract between the school and the community. And attendance is a great key to question what's going on in curriculum provision. You know, somebody said to me a while ago, our leadership behaviours are driven by what we measure. And one of the things that I would say is a key factor of curriculum analytics in terms of looking at the full provision. And when I say it probably is more than you think, and I say the full provision, I don't just mean what's going on in the classroom. That's part of it. But there's a whole lot more that goes on in a school provision that you buy staff for. And what we measure, if it's just a single word grade, or whether it's a progress score, or whether it's a reading or numeracy or literacy score, or a phonics score, or a GCSE grade, or an A-level grade, or a BTEC, or CAMNAT, or another qualification, well, those things are a measure. But when that alone drives our decisions, we need to look a little bit beyond that whole setup. So what next? I found in starting to look at analytics, there are characteristics, and I've done hundreds of schools now. There are different characteristics between the different phases. Now, some of you here will be primary. Some of you will be secondary, and you'll say to me, oh yeah, but this is a secondary thing, isn't it? Well, no, but it's different. There are things that go on and are characteristic about primaries that and prep schools and infant schools and junior schools that are as worthy of curriculum analytics as it is in the secondary. Just the focus is different. I'll get a little bit more into that. Now, as is with a lot in the education profession, there is poorly developed language, and there, you know, how we schedule stuff and how we organize stuff. And again, that's not just a secondary question. In primary, it's the questions around, well, who makes the decision on part-time staff and work patterns and so on. I deal with a lot in that context where it's actually the teacher that's leading it rather than the need of the school, and there needs to be a blend of those two. When I talk about population design, I'll come back to that. But you know how we. I was doing a show recently, and we were asked to do a masterclass with some colleagues. So I asked one of the head teacher colleagues that I've worked with for a number of years to come and join me, and I listened to him talking about smart curriculum analytics. And what he said to the audience was, it wasn't until I did this analytic process that I realized that we have created ceilings of limitation for some of our children. And the analytics have opened the door for me to consider how I've structured my school for the benefit and the aspiration of every child. He said I'm not quoting him exactly, but that's the essence of what he was saying. And I stood back and thought, as I was listening to him talking to the audience, do you know, actually that one, it's brilliant for me to hear someone saying that about the process and the work that we've been doing. But what a revolutionary insight to bring to his own school. And his own school is a challenging school in a challenging area, with the need for insights that will open the door for every learner in the building. Yeah, moving on. So, it's secondary. There's a lot of it, there's in the secondary world, there's always one person that's got that aspiration, or at least one, if not more. And sadly, that's not always the case these days, that believe that timetabling is their future, and realizing that actually putting together the logistics of school makes the characteristic of the school. It really changes the way that the school is operating, and there are lots of schools are struggling with those kind of dynamics. But curriculum design is not writing timetables. Curriculum leadership is not just writing timetables. It is a characteristic of it. It is a functional element of that whole process. But kind of decisions that are made that impact the finances. Well, we've got some spare teaching, let's bung another class in, or we want to do this, and let's create more classes because we need smaller classes. And that kind of incidental, incremental change has big financial impact. So analyzing that process, now that's a very secondary question, as I've just given you that kind of primary view of one of the aspects of curriculum analytics. So here we are. I've been in schools now for nearly 40 years, and remember in my first cycle, there was that kind of narrative around, the cynical, yeah, it's 10, every 10 years it comes back. We'll see that thing come round in 10 years' time. As in a script that I wrote to sort of advertise this event, I said, look, somebody said to me the other day, do you realize that children that are born today will be in 2024 will be 76 in 2100. Therefore, from this point on, we are educating children for the 22nd century. And it's one of those kind of, wow, I hadn't really thought about that. Yes, we're educating children for the year 2100, 2101, 2102. Now, what's the world going to be like in 76 years? Well, people will tell us it's going to be very different. I mean, this is not the place to be talking about AI and computer technology and so on. I hope a lot of what we do will be actually much more appreciative of our humanity and how we are as humans, and how many of them are on the planet, and how much water there is on the planet, and all the other things that we might get into might be there. But this cynicism about a 10-year cycle is okay. Yeah, I've seen it all before. But the reality is things have changed. Certainly the education profession as it is today is not the education profession I knew 39 years ago when I started. And certainly there are elements of decisions that have been made, because we know that the wheels of government grind slowly and change is reluctantly approached, because why break something that's working or is established? We might say as professionals, yeah, but some of it's not working. And we know certainly the Lord's report just at Christmas suggested that there were elements of the whole process that isn't working. But the wheels grind slowly, because we're not into snap change, and we want good evidence. And I would suggest to you that analytics provides a good amount of that information. That is why things are beginning to change. And certainly, the work of Hay back at the turn of this century that was looking at maverick leaders. There are leaders out there that are willing to put their head above the parapet and say, well, I've seen, I believe, I know, I've structured, I've got analytics that tell me that we can do this differently. And that's where I hope a lot of leaders are. Now, what I would suggest to you is that there are a number of analytics that schools are being encouraged to use. And I believe it's a good thing, but I don't believe that they are the end of all of the analytic stories. I put on the screen what I refer to as the Magnificent Seven. They are the seven integrated curriculum finance planning measures that began this whole conversation in around 2018, 2017, 2018. But each one of them, and I'm not going to go into each one of them in detail because you've probably seen them yourselves. I will comment on one or two. Let's look at contact ratio, and I'm going to come back to it in a little bit. There's still debate about what the number should be, and there is a difference in characteristics between primary education and secondary education. Most primary schools will get that figure to between 75 and 80% easily, because PPA cover and the number of staff that are non-teaching and the management time is a lot less in a primary school. Now, whether that's right or not, that's an analytic question. Whether it's achievable is another matter. In secondary, it's rarely at that number. Now, our school will tell you, or I've talked about the magic number for years. That's 78%, and I know trusts that have been arguing for it to be higher than 80. But in the culture we sit in now, about where we're talking about reducing teacher workload, and we're talking about well-being and the ability of teaching staff to do the job that they're being asked to do, there's a question around that. Now let's talk about the wheels of government turning slowly. When was PPA, planning, preparation and assessment, when was that put into the system? Well, the truth is it was in the late 80s, early 90s, where we started talking. That's when I started teaching, or into my sort of early days of leading departments. That ability to put that time in a teacher's timetable, in terms of their week, primary, we didn't have PPA. It wasn't talked about. A teacher was teaching, and they managed their teaching time all of the week. So contact ratio is one of those things that's turned slowly. So you think that's 30 plus years that we've had this 10%. Well, I asked some questions around, is it enough? In fact, we were doing analytics on a school the other day. We've been working on it just recently, where the school has made the decision that it will be 20%. And I've been working with a number of other schools where they will complement that time with other teacher development time, or release time, or peer profiling. That's something from my past that we, so opportunities to pair up staff and share good practice and observe each other and go and look at other schools and do other things. That's just one characteristic. But I would say that some of the analytics that we see in school, actually benchmarking, in the benchmarking ideology, is it's just a number. And can we get to that number? And almost consequences be damned. What's going to happen if that's what we achieve? So I would say that analytics gives, if you take those numbers, it gets you into a conversation about, well, what is right? What is right for us? What makes a difference in our context? Now, when I talk about analytics, I quite often just go straight to our dashboard. Our dashboard for the SMARTcurriculum analytics is a tool that we've developed. It's an online tool, and we draw data out of any school's MIS, primary and secondary, and it looks the same for every school in the sense of the format is the same, but the conversations are very different. As I've said to you, on the left-hand side on the screen, you can see curriculum enhancement. Now, I'll explain a bit about this word enhancement in a second, but just so focus on the curriculum. Middle column, focus on staffing and what we're doing with the people that we've bought, the time that we've bought to deliver our curriculum. And on the right-hand side, of course, there's a financial implication. So how much does it cost to do what we're doing? And what's the difference between the categories of people that we are buying to achieve something for our children? Now, the analytics open that conversation. It creates a narrative. Now, let's just talk about this question of enhancement. I would say enhancement is the strategic investment in learning. Now, it's an investment of time, it's investment of teachers, and it's an investment of money. But the analytics give us an understanding. Now, if you know the work of T.I. Davis, created or did some studying of Welsh schools in the late 1960s, wrote a book about the schools and about that whole process. I can give detail in the comments if you're interested. And by the way, I should have said right at the beginning, I'm talking in this way. I can't follow the comments that you might make, but if you're watching on LinkedIn, please do drop comments on the broadcast on LinkedIn. And after the broadcast, I will go in and answer questions or respond to things that are there. Please don't feel, because I can't see that and talk to you at the same time, but it just please do, and I will get to everybody that asks a question. So let's come back to this enhancement. What is it about? Where do we put the investment? Now, in curriculum, I would describe it in these terms. T.I. Davis described a basic and bonus. I don't use those terms because I'm not sure that bonus is the right narrative and language around schooling. But what he's basically saying is there is a target average class size. There's a target number of children that we want in an organizational group, a population, that work with a teacher, an adult, in a classroom, probably, but not necessarily, because they might be on a field, or they might be in a workshop, or they might be swimming in a swimming pool. But it's one teacher and it's a group of learners. So what's that? What's the number of learners that works? Now, there's a whole lot of dynamics that we'll get to in a second around that. But basically, the principle is a target number of learners in a group with a teacher. How many of those units do I need for our units of population? Now, we divide children in by years. So take then the total number of in a year, divide it by the target class size. Now, typically in infant, that's 30. In secondary, it's about 27. In sixth forms, it's around 17, although a lot of people would say, I wish that we could get to 17. In nursery, it would be 4 or 5 or 13, depending on their age in that cycle. And our analytics work right across those. So you take that as the target average class size, and then you multiply it by the number of units that you have in a cycle. So in a primary school, that's a week. So typically 25 hours, 5 hours a day. In a secondary school, it might be 25 hours, or it might be 50 if you run a 50-period cycle. So that gives you the number of lessons that you are providing with a target average class size. Let's say it's 27. Let's say we've got 270 learners. So there would be 10 classes in each one. If I've got a 50-period cycle, then obviously I need 500 periods. So if I've got 500 periods and I plan more than that, so I plan 525 or 550, then I'm adding a bit of enhancement. Now that's reducing class size, that's adding time to do certain things on the curriculum. And the question is, how much can I enhance? Now, the kind of questions that I've been asked in that process, can we afford smaller classes? We've got lots of primaries that have asked me, look, we want to commit to the parents that the target maximum class size is 25. I've got a school at the moment that we're working on where they've pitched, can we make it work at 20? So a 2-form entry primary school with 60 children in a year group are looking to put on 3 classes of 20, not 2 classes of 30. It's challenging, and there are implications of doing it, but you see there's an investment of time. Now, we would describe that as with 2 forms and adding a class, that's 50% extra time. So that's an enhancement of 50%. Now, I'm not saying that's wrong, because if you can achieve it, then why wouldn't you do it? But the question is, can it be done? Now, if you go to the other end of the spectrum, to the 6th form, where people say to me, well, what's the number we should stop offering a subject? Let's say music, for example. Nationally, we know 6% children likely pick music. It varies depending on the teaching staff and the propensities of music within the school. But what's the threshold number that we would decide that a class runs or not? Well, notice it says target average class size. It's not a threshold number. It's not saying here is that position and anything below it stops. Because, in trading terms, there's this whole idea of loss leaders. We put something on that's going to make a loss, but it attracts you to do something else. So if I'm going to put on physics and I attract 6 people, if I don't put it on, then all of those that are going to do physics, chemistry, and biology might well attract a lot more. I've seen A-level groups of 27 and 30. So, and multiples of those in a school, very, very popular in a lot of schools. And similarly with psychology and sociology, large classes. It's an average, an aggregate. So we could take an average aggregate. So can we run a smaller one? So I talk about um, that that aggregate mindset rather than a threshold mindset. And that kind of analysis, the analytics inform that whole process, and it's a bit more. It's got more integrity than simply saying we'll cut it because we can't afford it because it's that number. Well, you might be able to afford it because your music member of staff might have free time if they're not teaching that program, so it may not be such a loss. So there's a bit more intelligence about that process. Now I'm going to get into some of the other characteristics. Now this one is a very specifically secondary view. I see a lot of these models. They are typically the top one is 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 bottom, so they're both 11 to 16 models. They've got Key Stage 3, which sort of covers up to 14 subjects. Key Stage 4 has got a number of option groups, whether it's 3 or it's 4, and then core delivery and the broader things that go on. But there's a one-dimensional model. It's a one-size-fits-all idea. And in the modern schooling world, I would question whether this is where we need to be in terms of our thinking. I see lots of people that say, well, here's the pattern for our school, particularly if, excuse me, if they're leading timetabling, it's easy to deliver because it's block based, and it's so we've got maths and we've got English and we've got science and we've got all the other subjects, and that's how it's delivered. But one size fits all is the methodology that it's drawing on, and we know that one size doesn't fit all for all the learners in the school. Now we know the pressure that's going on with SEND funding, and we've seen the growth, and I've seen the growth, and I was one of those that started the whole process of alternative provision. Often these days external providers, because the climate is different and we need a different world view on school view for learners that are maybe school phobic or have difficulties in the classroom, so social issues around what the classroom dynamic looks and feels like. So all of that's going on in a one-size-fits-all model, and we provide what I would call additionality. We are putting on other things away from what is the standard school delivery. And I would say that in funding and analytics is one of the biggest challenges we have to face, particularly in secondary. I would say I've seen it more in middle school because there tends to be more freedom and flexibility, and in a lot of middle schools there is choice and there's lots of sort of structure around it, and in big primaries where big primaries are looking at putting on big maths at the same time, and numeracy and literacy programs that have multiple teachers beyond the number of classes. So a sixth form entry primary that's putting on 8 maths classes, so that's again adding to the enhancement, but very granular in its delivery. Now what that precipitates out of that view is that if the child doesn't fit, then we need to put on additionality rather than changing what's going on in the structure. Now I prefer, and this is, if you've worked with me, you'll know I do this with you, I prefer a two-dimensional model because it goes beyond the idea of one size fits all. Adaptation is both possible and desirable. And I refer to, I refer to adaptive curriculum. And we've been made very much aware of adaptive teaching and the requirements and the kind of move away from sort of limited range differentiation. I would also say it speaks to the blocking models that we use. And I would also say, if you haven't done already, get Becky France's book, Reassessing Ability Grouping, and begin to understand the challenges of mixed ability and ability grouping structures, because they may well be putting ceilings on learning. Now, the 2D modeling that I'm making the case for here is that you don't have to provide the same diet for every child in the building. And obviously there are populations within that. There are small populations and larger populations. The school that I've got on the screen here is a pretty large school, 300 in a year group. but you can see the patches of purple and green where I worked with the school to look at adaptive programs, and I would come down to sort of program design rather than structure-led activity, where some of the things that were going on changed over the year, but the diet of the children, the learners that were in them, actually adapted to their needs. So some of the programs were very literate focused, with inputs for raising reading age, for reading recovery. Some of them were numerate programs that were building understanding and numeracy, and using application in a different way. So using IT and geography, particularly, you'd probably guess that the green one was the maths, but also considering the kind of different within the three populations that you see on the screen. There were different delivery numbers, so it wasn't one size fits all. They were adapted for children's needs. Now, I would say this is postmodern school structure. The modern school structure has led to lots and lots in secondary schools of blocking, all maths on at the same time, all English on at the same time, and get the group so you've got that flexibility to move, but it determines that one size fits all. And I would make the case in analytics that if you wanted to analyze what's going on for children, then you need to move into looking at school a little bit differently. And that's one of the characteristics. Now, going back to that curriculum enhancement modeling, you see here, and I refer to our analytic tool. The one thing that I've seen in doing quite a few of these processes over the last few years is that there's a way of profiling schools. And the one thing that I found in a very simple little chart, as we started to do more and more of these, is what I would refer to a curriculum profile. Now, this is as true in primary as it is in secondary. If you notice, you can see they're labeled secondary and primary, and the top one in the top school is an all-through school, and we've done quite a few all-through provisions. What you see is this peaking at certain points, and of course you know where they are. They're at the assessment thresholds. So in primary school they tend to be around year 5 and 6. We're throwing all of our extra teaching at the points at which the tests are going to be. So you see it at 5 and 6, you see it at 10 and 11. 10 and 11 tends to be around the breadth of curriculum choice, so making the options, or what we would refer to as course selection processes. And then moving into the sixth form, quite often it's around year 13, where learners are leaving at the end of year 12. Now, this whole process is a really interesting dynamic, because if you were to start questioning intervention threshold focused activity, buying staff so that I've got people that I can put at those extra thresholds, what we're creating is an intervention culture. And when would we get out of an intervention culture? We've got to get the exam results up, we've got to achieve it, so we need to put those people there. I would suggest that the brave move, and this is one of the things that's come out of the analytic process, is to invest the time earlier to create better habits early, because the only way to achieve in a costly and prudent manner that process is to have high class numbers, so big classes in key stage in secondary schools in key stage 3. So you can see on that first chart a very low number at key stage 3, but quite a high number at key stage 4 and 5. And then what's going on in primary, well, obviously key stage 1, there is a limit, a legal limit, so classes can't be larger than 30, but they tend to be 1, 2, 3 teachers depending on the forms of entry. And quite often, and that's not an untypical chart you see there, where we're putting on extra classes at key stage 2, at the end of key stage 2, to intervene ready for SATs. And the question would be asked is, in a progress focused development, wouldn't you put that time earlier in the process? Now, it's a question. I'll come back to a question about that in a second. So just to sort of summarize, in our analytics, why I believe it's important, and the dashboard you can see here, these three elements: curriculum enhancement, staffing enhancement, and finance enhancement. Curriculum is our first point because it's how we put the school together. It has implications on the size of populations, class populations, and year group populations, school populations. We can profile the relative need. So what is going on in the school? I haven't gone into the detail of SEN and EHCP and where that is, but there's a whole lot of provision there. And quite often AP is hidden in a provision because it's not shown on a timetable, because it's somewhere else, and obviously we're not staffing it. You are paying for it, and obviously, well, quite often you're paying a great deal more than the ORPU, the age-weighted pupil unit, for the child. So you're actually taking money away from another child to achieve the learning program for that child. Now, obviously, there's high needs funding, and there's EHCP, and there's all sorts of other things that are going on, and there's economies of scale that are able to be achieved in larger organizations. But curriculum design is not just about what goes on in that sort of teacher classroom activity. There are a lot of other things, and enhancing that and providing curriculum design that will meet the needs of the learners quite often is just assumed. Well, we do the classes and these other things, and then we've got to find the money to do the other. And I'm saying we need to come back and look again at that whole structure to look at how it's done. Now, I'm conscious of time, and I'm going to try and get through some of these things quickly. Big question at the moment on staffing enhancement, and lots of leaders are coming to us and saying, look, we want to do something special. We want to keep our staff retention is high. We want to have it higher level. So how can we invest in our teachers? And I'd say that characteristic of every school, challenging schools through to grammar schools to high performing comprehensives, and right across the system, people are questioning that whole, how can we invest in our people? Look, we can't get enough teachers, and when we get them, we want to keep them. So how do we invest in those people? So the big question is this contact ratio. But having said that, it's deeper than that as well, because it is about all the processes around the teaching climate within the school. So all the things that go on is, so how are we supporting marking? How are we supporting preparation? What are we doing with resources in schools? Actually, a conversation I was having yesterday with schools was, you realize in a school budget that typically only 4% is spent on the classroom resources. 4% of £1 million in a primary school, or 4% of £8 million in a standard, it's a reasonable size secondary school. 4%, that's all we spend on the resources for the classroom. I maintain, actually, one of the schools I was dealing with, it was actually less than 1%. And that's a staggeringly low number. But anyway, I'm moving away from this. So staffing enhancement being one of the key things that's going on at the moment, because it's the one that speaks significantly to teacher workload. The government figure, and I mentioned earlier, ASCL have worked on this 78%. In our analysis, you can see the chart that we show, and we break it down into bits. So what are the constituent parts that make up that effort? The orange part you see on the screen is the teacher's time used for teaching, so teacher facing. And somebody said to me some time ago, contact ratio is, if I go and stand as a school leader, if I go and stand in the corridor at this point in time, the number of my staff that are facing children is the contact ratio. So how many of them are not in the room because they're walking the corridors, or they're doing management meetings, or they're on phase return meetings, or whatever, all the things that are in the leadership of a school. But the bit that's planned for teaching is a percentage, and that's it. Now, your teacher capacity is your teaching staff full-time equivalent number multiplied by the cycle of your school. So 25 hours in a primary, maybe 50 periods in a secondary. That's the number you've got. So what are we using those other things for? 10% of it has to be given to planning, preparation, and assessment. That's in the teacher's pay and conditions. An amount of it is given to management time. Now, the study that was done by the DFE suggests that in a secondary school, in terms of population, typically 12% of the population would be leadership. Now that's got to do around the leadership scale and the amount of money that's given in ALPU and how much of that is spent on leading the school. So the more people you put on leadership and reduce their timetable allocations, the lower the contact ratio and the costlier they get. So there's why the drive is to increase the contact ratio, because it makes it more achievable. But having more teachers available means that you can enhance the curriculum in ways because you've got more teaching capacity. So, but in a secondary school, around 12%. In a primary school, typically around 19%, because there are less people. So the percentage is higher, but that's typically where it is. So where we see schools that have got management time, the amount of our management time that's over 20%, we would just talk to them about, do you know what that's for, what it's doing? Because in your context, that may well be right, because there are parents to engage with, because there are challenging social contract issues about getting them into school and taking time with them. But then there's the question is a leader the right person to do that? Can we train someone else that might be, yeah, dare I say it, cheaper? Now, then you have the blue bit. The blue bits are unassigned teaching, the bit of time that's actually not assigned to anything. I was working with a school recently, just a little while ago, and I said, do you realize that the amount of unassigned teaching, if you work to how much every lesson is or every 1 hour is costing you, there's actually £250,000 of unassigned teaching in your staff budget. The leader literally fell off the chair, and when we picked him up again, it was that shock of £250,000, and they were using that time to, in the school, to change the climate of the school. So £250,000 worth of teaching staff was spent on wandering the corridors. I mean, we used to call it MBWA. It was management by walking about. Others used to refer to it as management by wandering aimlessly, and that's one of the challenges within that whole process of, is it purposeful? And unassigned teaching is not necessarily wrong, but is it at a level that is right for your school? And in some schools there needs to be some of that activity. Now, walking the building is not something that needs so much in a primary environment, because they tend to be more open environments. Secondaries, there's lots of corridors, and therefore there needs to be that kind of but in the social dynamic and the climate of a school, that's not unusual. But not going to center on that because I need to concentrate on time now. Training being another feature. How much time do we give to career entry programs, to ECT training, to MPQH, to MPQSL, to so all of that time, and some professional qualifications in that whole process. What's the investment and what's our strategy around it? So how do we enhance teaching? Now, I said to a particular secondary school who would wrestling with the pink bit, the enhancement, and saying, well, they were talking to the staff about, we need to cut your photocopying bills, and every time they went to the photocopier, there's a big red notice that, do you really need to copy this? And it was kind of penny pinching around that. And I'd said, well, look, you're creating this kind of adversarial deficit mindset culture in the school. What you're actually doing is investing a significant amount of time in enhancing a teacher's loading, because they were giving. So I'm going to talk in these terms again as secondary, and that this is a bit of an anathema to primary teachers because they don't get this chance, although I think it will happen. In a 50 period cycle, 45 teaching hours would be 10% PPA, the 5 periods. So if you're teaching 45, 10% of that rounded up is 5 periods. That's why you get 5. So what if you say your maximum load is 42? So you're going to give 3 hours to every teacher. So every teacher in your amount, and let's say near the 4% that's illustrated on the screen, maybe that number is 50 teachers times 3 periods, 150 periods of enhancement. We're going to invest this and use it wisely, and we're going to monitor that, and it's not going to be taken for cover, and it's not going to be used for other activities. It's yours for teacher development. And we've got schools that are now tying programs around that investment. So, well, if you did that, because you're actually doing it, but you're creating in the school the mindset of deficit budget. We can't afford you to print that one sheet of paper that's costing you 3p, but actually we're investing in you probably £10,000 in teacher time, because every lesson could be 2,300, 2,400, and we're giving you 3 or 4 periods in investment. Well, some of those schools in the budget positions now are having to rethink some of those decisions, but it's a very different climate conversation from a deficit mindset, we can't afford that 3p, to I'm giving you £2,500 of time to do something to give you space. The analytics have proved that that is possible and is achievable. And I would have to say, I don't see many schools now, secondary schools particularly, running at that kind of number. Now, on the flip side, primary, typically we're seeing 2.5 hours a week that's it. Now, some primaries, if they're using their HLTAs, are beginning to say, well, could we make that 3 hours? Could we give people rather just the afternoon, or can we, and actually beginning to analyze the use of their time so that they can invest that in the people and achieve what they want to achieve. So that narrative down the center column is around proportionality of people and how we're using them. Enhancement with purpose is what I've just described. Other things that come out of that kind of analytics is whether it's teacher-led, and then there's a whole questions around whether there's generalist delivery or specialist delivery. I'm just going to spend a little time on the cost. I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail, but I've alluded to in what I've been saying that there's that whole idea of analysing how much each lesson costs. Now, that the impact of that is drawn from the structure of the school, the number of TLRs that are given, how you're using your UPS. Now, how many primary schools do we know where every teaching member of staff is on the upper pay scale, and the implications of those costs? And many primary leaders have said to me, what do I do? Well, the answer to that is there isn't much you can do. Once those members of staff are on that scale, you are committed to that cost. Now, coming back to that, what's the analytical position next? Well, you're getting experience, and it may be that experience means that you can be leaner with your leadership team, or maybe reduce the number of TLRs. That because there is only a limited pot to spend. And now I'm speaking to some challenging circumstances, some challenging things within that whole process. Now, I've talked about the phase specific activities. There are things within each of those elements, the kind of teacher-led, non-teacher-led early year professional questions, in setting ratios, can we enhance those? Should a nursery be attached to a school in that and what's the difference between an exclusive, mutually exclusive nursery, a traded nursery, against one that's in the school? And is it efficient in its delivery? Should it be teacher-led or non-teacher-led? In primary, sort of the focus of most of the questions in primary tend to be on the staff and the staff use. In secondary, it's about curriculum granularity, program design, and that whole process of who's involved. And then at post 16, it's about teacher dependency and how we achieve those thresholds. So are we investing all our time at thresholds? So I'm making the case that analytics opens the doors to a whole lot of other questions, and a number of questions that you may have answers to. What the process does brings it all to one place. Now, in doing the analytics, I would say that we've come to 12 principles of curriculum analytics for school improvement. I'm just going to look at one or two of them just quickly. I talk about the balancing objectives, the balance of three. Effective curriculum, is it doing and is it getting the impact that we suggested it might need to be? Is it efficient? Is the structure we can afford? have we got to go back, and have we gone out what I talk about curriculum drift? It's got too big, and we can't manage it, and it's unsustainable. So where do we come back to? And I have to say, if you don't do it well, you don't do it properly, what I've seen many times over is that, well, 3 years later, they'll come back and say, can we do it again? Because we're back again. So this is about behaviors and changing those behaviors within an organization. And then the big question, are we doing what's right for the children in the area? Now, I would be a proponent of regional curriculum, and I think there are a whole lot of things that we've got to get into in terms of that whole process. Now, look, typically I get excited about something, and I talk. There's a whole lot of other things I wanted to talk through. I'm going to put it on the screen because you can then stop it, and you'd be able to sort of go in and tease these out. But I think those are the characteristics of efficient, effective, and ethical curriculum. I talk to governing bodies about this, as a strategic leadership question. Is what we're doing efficient, effective, and ethical? Is it right for the children, or is it just we're focusing just on outcome tables? Now, of course, you've got to focus on outcomes because reputationally that is a big issue, and that's in the public narrative. But there's more to it than that. Is your school effective in the sense of it being the school of choice in your area? And how do you establish that as a possibility? Outcomes are important, but learner destinations and attendance are also important, because if they're not attending, then there's something wrong with what's in the environment, and the climate of the organization needs to be looked at. One feature, just that I'd talk about the continuum, and I'll just leave this thought with you to consider. If you could think about class size narrative, I've talked about sort of the generalist to specialist. Across the bottom there, I talk about the dependence of learners. Our youngest learners, apart from nursery, are in the biggest classes. They are the most dependent on the leader of learning. At the other end of the spectrum, we have the most independent learners, A-level, level 3, post-16 learners. They are the most independent, yet they are in the smallest classes. I would suggest in the analytics, we've got this the wrong way round. We also put the most funding, or we did. It's actually beginning to balance out differently now. We put the most money at the most independent end. It was argued, certainly I know when I started teaching A-level way back in the 80s, it was around resourcing. We needed money for more expensive resourcing. Well, even that's a questionable position now. Surely we should be investing earlier. That's that question of that progress mindset. And I leave that with you. There's whole questions around choice and children making those thresholds of changing people's minds. I would say in profiling staff, we've come to, is your staff a specialism oriented staff or a generalism oriented staff? What's the culture of your organization? Is it granular and lots of permutations and children move around the building a lot? Or are there less permutations, program led, actually design led in the room, which is a sort of very primary culture style of delivery? Not generalism in the sense of anyone can do anything, but the generalism in the sense of a teaching professional is delivering multidisciplinary activities. Now, the larger the school, I've found, the larger the school, so we're coming to year groups of up to 450, the more granular the activity becomes, and the more specialist we see. So that's not characteristic in a primary school, because it tends to be program-led, teacher-led, and there's questions now about specialism. So do we bring in the music specialist? Do we bring in the PE specialist? Do we bring in the art specialist to deliver, because particular teachers may feel that somebody else can do those things better? In the secondary world, the larger the school, the more granular, the more specialist it becomes. We end up with space science, astrophysics, and human biology rather than combined science. And so we end up with physical geography and social geography. We end up with food teachers and design technology teachers, or the compliant material and the textiles specialist. all of those conversations around specialism and the dynamics of your staff are built from that analytics. And what do you say at interview? What's the conversation at the point where people are coming into your organization, and how are you presenting that journey for them within your organization? Population design, big issue. How we create movement for children. I would say population design, and go back to the book of Becky Francis. There's some language here that I was talking to a school a little while ago about streams. Now, if I mention streaming, it's got a very negative connotation, because in some areas, certainly areas that still maintain a grammar and comprehensive system, it's seen as that the children are taken off to a higher stream school. But actually, we do that in set design within our comprehensive schools. We stream by subject, top set, bottom set, middle set. We create what is effectively a stream in a subject. It's no different in terms of population design. And that, again, I would say, is where analytics is. That what are you actually doing, and what's the ethics around it? I would go into questions, if we're doing analytics, and go a bit further. Now, this one's got quite a lot of detail on it. I'm just going to make that a little bit larger. Who are the gatekeepers? What's the basis of the decision? Where's the opportunity for collaboration and shared discussion? How does the structure create ceilings and restrictions, often built around language choices? So there's a whole lot of structural setup around this whole process. So I'm moving towards the end now. Out of the analytics, we've also got into things around. I talked about adaptive curriculum earlier, but the whole setup. I asked a lot of secondary school teachers, do you know that the subjects that you deliver from the discount code list is classified by a sector? There are 15 sectors, and the 15 sectors contain all of the subjects that are approved for the performance table lists. Now, let's take maths and science. That's sector 2. There are science subjects, there are maths and statistics subjects. So all of the examining awarding bodies submit their qualifications to Ofqual, they're approved by the DFE, and they go on to the discount list, and that measures which ones you can do in combination. Now, again, a very secondary question, but actually it's a primary to secondary view. What experiences are learners getting in a very open provision to experience all of those sectors? How do those sectors feed into a local economic development plan? So what we now know as LSIPs, the local skills improvement plans. So do you know in your curriculum design what the LSIP is in your area, and where the priorities are, and how you are building that process? Now, certainly the LSIP program is actually very focused on the FE sector, but I would suggest that actually, if we don't join these up, we're going to have problems in the future, because we're not getting learners ready. And these qualifications are all there, and we talk about that narrative now. As an idea, I've worked with a number of primary schools that are doing Picture My Future programs or early career guidance. There's 15 sectors. There's actually 18. 3 of them have got qualifications that are used in school, of which energy and waste management being 2 of those that are not there. If you were to consider those 15 sectors over a 39-week year, you could spend 2 weeks on each one and expose learners through PSE, through assemblies, through experiences in classrooms, to get an understanding of each of them, rather than the rather closed mindset, sport means becoming a footballer, and I'm going to be a doctor, or I'm going to be an architect, to actually see that there are a whole lot of other new professions. Remember, we're educating for the 22nd century. So that whole idea of the journey is really important. The language journey, another example of analytics and how the populations are built through a school. I'm not going to go into deep part of that now, but just that's one of the things that we look at within our process. And then we have this whole, I referred to it earlier, and I've talked through that process, what support and what's intervention, and how it's costed as additionality. We talk about inclusivity, but so much of what we do is disintegration, is additionality, is take them out and provide something else. And I would suggest the opportunity there from the analytics that we've done is more moving into adaptive curriculum. Now, I'll leave you with this question. If you were not doing that level of analytics now, how would the school change? If you were to move into an evaluation plan and risk analysis, the question is, what if we do and what if we don't? What's the implication of making change? And what's the implication of leaving it as it is? In the context of all I've said, there's a whole lot to consider. That's an hour of your time. If you're watching this, after the live presentation, take a moment and pause and just have a look. If you do feel that there's something in there that we can help you with, I've put the contact details at the bottom. Next time we will be talking with Andrew Fell, and that's the 21st of June. Andrew will come and join me, and we're going to talk about research-informed school improvement and how the analytics and all of the other processes are being used in the process. I hope this has been useful. It's been a pleasure to take some of your time. I will leave it there. Contact details are just there for you as I just scroll through. I'll leave that going for a moment. If we can help you in any way, do get in touch with us. My details are on LinkedIn. You can book a call or email us on info@smartcurriculum.net and come and talk. Even if you're just interested and just want to ask a question, I will answer questions on the comment section. But thank you for your time. Take care. Have a good day and reflect on what you're doing now. Bye-bye.